in case you didn't notice, 'tis the season. All around us, isn't it? It's creeping up on us, even here at the center. Our talk today is Christmas symbology. Recently we had a little short talk by Donna talked to me about symbolism of the world religions that are happening all around us now at this time of year. I thought it would be interesting to look at Christmas symbology. And you know, there's a lot of things around Christmas based on symbols. And actually, we could say that most of what we see in the Christmas celebrations are more symbols than any historical value. There's more folklore and mythology in a lot of the Christmas stories than there is actually history. So I'm going to present some of these questions today. Did Jesus and Mary actually travel to Bethlehem? Were there really 3 kings, or even a star? Is the birth of Jesus even actually a Christian story, or is it a Jewish story? And, of course, the most relevant one is, how can we use this symbology in our everyday lives now? How can we make it relevant? John Shelby Spong was a high bishop in the Episcopal Church, and he wrote a book called Jesus for the Non-Believer. Absolutely fascinating book. I encourage you to read it. It's really awakening. And he tells us a lot of facts about what things were going on at the time of Jesus. And they may be kind of different from what you're used to hearing. We hear a lot of people talking about putting Jesus and putting Christ back in Christmas. But I think a lot of the stories that we actually celebrate at Christmas time are more mythical than historical. And so the real life of Jesus, quite often, it can be lost in all of that true story. Is it actually true? The early writers of the New Testament presented a narrative based on Jewish texts to assert that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. Remember, Jesus never was a Christian. He was a Jew at the time he died. The Old Testament texts provide many prophecies of the upcoming Messiah and miraculous occurrences surrounding the births of kings and mystical figures. The intent of the early Christians writing the New Testament was to show how Jesus checked all the boxes to qualify for the position of the Messiah. Messiah, by the way, is a Hebrew word and means the anointed one. In Judaism, that the Messiah was the long-expected king of the line of David, who would deliver Israel from foreign bondage and restore it to the glories of its golden age. Stars pronouncing the birth of prominent rabbis were commonplace in Jewish folklore. Stars foretold the births of Abraham, Isaac, and Moses. So a star certainly was needed to announce the birth of a Messiah, was it not? So there it was. The book of Isaiah, written in Jerusalem 740 BC, 740 years before Jesus was born, talks about kings from Sheba riding camels, following the brightness of God's rising, bringing gifts of gold and frankincense. Another story written in 1 Kings 550 BC talks about the Queen of Sheba visiting King Solomon, bringing myrrh along with other spices. Another model for the story of the Magi might have been provided by the journey of the Roman king Tiridates I of Armenia with his Magi, or stargazers, to pay homage to the Emperor Nero, which took place at 66 AD, a few years before the date assigned to the composition of the birth story in the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament. So it's very likely that is a source of the idea of where the Magi came from. There's another one in 288 BC. The Syrian king Seleucus Nicator is recorded to have offered gold, frankincense, and myrrh, among other things, to Apollo in his temple. So you can see this idea of bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh are ancient ideas that are attributed to the idea of bringing them to Jesus. Here's another thing: Jesus probably was never born in December. His birthday on December 5th was chosen to subjugate the pagan holiday of Saturnalia. More than likely, Bethlehem was also not his birthplace. Jesus of Nazareth had to be born there in Bethlehem to check off some of the prophesied boxes, because Bethlehem was the birthplace of King David. So his heir, to assume his rightful authority, had to be born there as well. The story about Joseph and Mary traveling to register in a government census is also a fabrication that conveniently places them in Bethlehem, the time of the birth. No such census can be found in public records from that time, and Joseph would not have had to take Mary anyway, or even register, because at that time only men were registered. Women were little more than property. So, what's the relevance of these discrepancies? And these are just a few of the many inaccuracies or implausibilities about the birth story in the Bible. What are we to take from these stories and from this symbolism? Well, first, they lead us to a deeper understanding of the importance of the birth of Jesus. Looking at the Bible metaphysically rather than literally opens a greater, deeper understanding of what it's all about. And if we look at the stories literally, they kind of lack the luster and the deeper reward if we can actually understand them metaphysically. The birth of Jesus was not just a common birth date, but it was a world-changing event. It was a date of great spiritual significance. And the writers of the Bible wanted to make this perfectly well known. The Magi were not Jewish. The fact that the Magi were wise men and kings from around the world and saw Jesus as worthy of worship is considered proof that the baby was God's manifestation on earth. That's an important point, God's manifestation on earth. It represents the coming of Jesus to all people, unifying all nations, Gentiles and Jews, and all people, showing that Jesus was a unifying force. Their gifts had specific symbolic meanings as well. Gold signified Jesus' status as King of the Jews and also represented power. Frankincense was a fragrance used in the temple for worship and represented divinity or priesthood or spirituality. And myrrh, used in embalming, was a symbol referring to Jesus' mortality, because you would not use myrrh on something that could not die. And so it actually, I believe that myrrh was the most valuable, meaningful gift, because it showed God as man, God showing up in human form. Other stories talk about gold representing virtue, frankincense representing prayer, and myrrh representing suffering. By bringing these gifts, they declare the presence of the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit, and the understanding that he was Emmanuel, which means and represents God with us, or, as you would say in Science of Mind, God as us.
So you can probably guess mine isn't nearly as historical as David's is. Mine is going to be, again, touchy-feely part of it. And so I chose to talk about symbology, the symbology of the angel. So angel means messenger, and an angel represents the presence of God. In the Christmas story, the angel visits several times. The first time is when the angel visited Joseph and told him not to be afraid. Not to be afraid. Be ye not afraid, bringing a message of reassurance. And that's a message I think each and every one of us can take within for ourselves too, reassurance. Maybe you too have been in situations where you've also felt that calm sense of reassurance when maybe you're thinking to yourself, I know I've had these times where I'm thinking, gee, I feel really, really calm, and it's not a match for the outer surroundings, the chaos or turmoil that's going on, and yet I feel that sense of peace that David sang about in Christmas Peace in the meditation. So in those moments, I feel a sense of serenity. And I hope, too, that you can relate to that, too. I'm going to trust that everyone either has had that experience or is about to have that experience. It's a God moment when we feel like that, because in those times, we're able to appreciate the depth of our relationship with the inner peace of life itself. We know and we know that we know that there is one life. It's living itself in and through and as all of itself. So when, despite all appearances, I am assured of an inner peace so expansive that it outweighs form. And no matter what's going on, just sort of know that you're going to move through it, and that you're choosing at this time to move through it in grace and in love. Another time that the angels appeared was to the shepherds, and that was to announce the birth of baby Jesus. They came as messengers, and the Bible tells us, to reveal the good news, capital G, capital N, good news. Jesus' birth could be seen, in my humble opinion, as a symbol of the awakening of humanity to their highest potential, because he came to share a message. And I know we quite often say a message, but I rather think he came to share a lot of messages. One of them is, all I can do, so can you, and more. So while I take a drink, you can think about that. Thank you. Think about that more that you can do, that you can be, that you can experience. For you, it may simply be the peace that we just talked about. Getting to a point where you feel that peace no matter what's going on in life. And it may be something else. He also came, I believe, to teach us that there is only one life, and that what we do unto others, we are doing unto ourselves. So this week, like always, whatever the talk is going to be, I have some of those experiences. This week, I was offering guidance to a few young ones, some of my students, who I had heard had been disrespectful, quite disrespectful, to another adult. And of course, when I brought them up to talk, they were in denial of it. So I kind of switched to the scenario, and I said to them, because they're standing there with that defiant look on their faces, and I said to them, so guys, I know how very deeply you both love your moms. So I'm wondering if others were treating your mom the way you were treating this lady. What would you think about that? Well, both of those little defiant looks went to a remorseful look and looked down. So instantly, I knew they were denying what they had done, and I also knew that they got it. And I think that that's an important lesson for all of us. I know I attempt to do that always for myself, to realize so completely, so deeply that this is one life, that whoever we're talking with in relationship or giving body language or facial expressions off to, we are realizing that that person is us. And how would we want to be spoken to? I think the story illustrates how important it is, both the story of the boys and the story of Jesus' life, how important it is for all of us to see others through the eyes of love. To open our hearts so broadly in that moment that as we look out, we do not see an other. We see ourselves and what we can speak to, how we would want to be spoken to. It brings the question, how tightly will we hold on to our opinions about others? And as we see our oneness more clearly, we are able to live in a greater acceptance of our differences. Because indeed we recognize those, don't we? Even right here in our room, we have many differences. Differences of opinion, of lifestyle, of whatever it may be. But acceptance and support for each one on their path is so important, so that we can live in joyous celebration of the good news that it's one life. So angels, in whatever fashion they show up in our lives, are messengers of the good news that love is here. Love is fully present. It's here to stay, and it's available to each and every one of us in every now moment. Be ye not afraid. Charles Fillmore in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary quotes Luke and Matthew. First Luke, when he says, speaking about angels, that they are thoughts of the Lord, messages of good news. And in Matthew, our angels are our spiritual perceptive faculties, which ever dwell in the presence of the Father. He says an angel is the projection into consciousness of a spiritual idea. And our founder, Ernest Holmes, writes about angels also, not a whole lot, but a little bit, as he wrote in what was titled The Law of Correspondence. And he's talking about the tendencies which our thought takes. He tells us that in meditation, I'm going to start that again. In meditation, try to sense and to feel the indwelling good as the active principle of our lives. He goes on to say that the mystics call this action angel of God's presence, because they taught that there are two ideas, two directions for our train of thought. One is what we seem to be, and the other is what we really are. And so the direction we want to send our thoughts is in the direction of what we really are, that loving presence. Activating the angels, the messengers of good within us, means accessing our divine inner messenger of life and of love. And it takes us to a whole new level of living the good news.
So mythical and metaphysical symbolism allows us to understand concepts like divinity, oneness, wholeness, perfection, and the importance of values such as giving, thanksgiving, faith in the unseen, unity, and so on. The Bible uses morality stories to teach these things. And morality stories are basically parable kind of stories that are not necessarily realistic or historical, but are used to teach us deeper meaning, things for us to ponder on. because these things that we're talking about are not materialistic, mechanical things that we can touch and feel and see. They're inner ideas, they're inner concepts, they're spiritual concepts, which are a little more challenging for us to grab a hold of sometimes. Now, we use this basic morality story idea today all the time, and it's all around us. We teach our children wondrous stories about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. And then we create intricate background stories about the North Pole, flying reindeers, elves, sliding down chimneys. And all of these ideas convey deeper understandings about the importance of giving and receiving and kindness and so on. We know the stories aren't true. We know they're not literal. But we still teach our children these stories because of the great values that they receive from them. I think it's very interesting that we use so many lies to instill morality in our children, isn't it? The importance is to remember that the values that we learned as children, not the method used to teach those values, is what's important. The message is more important than the presentation, the way we received it. As adults, most of us are better off as a result of the unbelievable, unexplainable, implausible stories that instilled valuable belief systems for all of us. Spiritual essence being expressed in human form is often a tough concept to realize, to put into practice. Understanding the nature of God expressing itself in humanity, in us, and as us, is not always an easily accepted concept without either diminishing God, which is considered blasphemy, or excessive expansion of self, which is considered pride or hubris. The biblical birth story shows God expressed in humanity, and that's a very important concept for us to be able to understand. The birth in a stable represents the simplicity of the concept. The gravity of the world and cosmos drawn toward the event shows the multitude of its importance. Kings and wise men from other nations, other parts of the world, and even a star coming to that point shows great magnitude of importance to this event. So what we see is that balancing simplicity and infinity requires some creativity, does it not? Not just for the Jesus story, but in all aspects of our lives, actually. To understand that we are God in expression takes some creative thinking sometimes. So, let the symbols of the season remind us of our oneness with the One. God living in us, through us, and as us. And our prayer is you take this with you in the next week, the next year, the rest of your life, and learn how to understand the simplicity and the magnitude of all that is. And so it is.
So